your host, Nicoleta Talpeș, and this is ReThink. If you hear excitement in my voice, it's because I'm happy to announce our first episode of this podcast offered to you by the Private Investment Group. For the first episode, we look at sustainability, sustainable investment and diversity with Obediah AYTON, Chief Operating Officer at the Private Investment Group. Welcome to ReThink, the podcast offered to you by the Private Investment Group that brings together bright minds, thought leadership insight, and inspiring sustainable development actions. With each guest, we want to inspire action and provoke talks that matter. The first episode of the podcast is dedicated to topics such as sustainable business, sustainable investment, and ESG. And that's why I'm so happy to present my guest today, Obediah AYTON, Chief Operating Officer for the Private Investment Group. With 7 years of private wealth experience, Obi has proven ability to successfully build and grow a business platform across sovereign wealth funds, government, corporate, and local family offices in all regions of the world. Welcome, Obi.
Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to it. I think it's an incredible platform, and as especially this year, I'm looking forward to doing a lot more, especially contributing to the sustainability goals set by the United Nations, based in Dubai. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, in the last 2 years, we have experienced quite a period of disruption, and more than ever, the business environment needs to rethink its business as usual. Actually, the world is in crisis, socially and environmentally. What impact do you think this podcast may have in this context?
Well, everybody wants to see see behind the words. I mean, we live in a society today where we have news, we have PR, we have information, but it's hard to know if it's true or not. So the best thing about podcasts is you hear the voice, you see the people behind what matters. Sustainability is, you can talk and talk and talk, but it's the ones that act on what matters makes the difference. So I guess the purpose of me joining today and why I want to, let's say, support such initiatives is because I want people to see me, and I want my voice to potentially make a difference, even if it's just to one person. Again, that's making a difference in my eyes. So I think the podcast is a great initiative, and as I said, I look forward to hopefully satisfying the needs of people listening, watching, and seeing if they can gather some insightful information from what I've learned.
Indeed, one of our objectives is to inspire companies to reduce their negative impacts while enhancing their positive contribution to the sustainable development agenda and actually integrating the ESG principle in their businesses. But why is sustainability important to businesses, and why should all business environment should embrace sustainability?
Well, it's always been a thing. I mean, it's been around for God knows how many years. The problem you have is for governments, they announce initiatives, legislations, regulations. But for the private sector, they need to support these initiatives, because without their support, a lot of things don't get implemented. Now, again, looking at the private sector, it's very profit driven. So we look for returns. And that's a lot of the time because we have other people's money that we're managing, that we're obligated to make returns. Now, with sustainability and let's use climate technology for an example. It's a very long-term investment, and traditionally it doesn't make a huge amount of returns. I mean, I can invest in Uber, or I can invest in a solar farm. Solar farm takes 12 years, Uber can take 4 to 5 with a chance of a high return. So how the minds think is you're obviously going to back the sexy consumer product over the hardware that is actually going to save the planet. Now, data is becoming a lot more available to many. Regulation is becoming harder to large corporates. They're being fined for overuse of, let's say, machinery. They're being fined for, let's say, not contributing enough to the sustainability goals. They're not employing the right people, the right diversity across, let's say, the employment and the staff base that they may have. So I guess data is a key factor to this, because with data we can see the future. We can read the past and we can make the future better. So my point, and kind of why this is now so important, is in Europe, regulation's coming, which is a huge factor. Nobody wants to get fined for doing the wrong thing. So we thank the European Union for doing that. Number two is data is readily available. So we can actually predict, and we can actually make sustainable investments a lot more attractive. When the risk is always very high, investing in a pre-revenue, I don't know, a biofuel company, for example, where yes, they may have a certain amount of patents that have value, but they're still not selling. So believing in them when nobody's buying is hard. But with data, and the correct data, we can actually see that some of these corporations will have to buy some of these products. They will have to transition. Also, with the government putting legislation and regulation in, we know that in 2 years' time, they're going to have to alter to satisfy the regulatory requirements. So regulation, data, also COVID has enhanced it. Geopolitically, the world is a little bit fragile at the moment. So all of these factors are only going to enhance our vision towards it. Now, quickly before I pass back over to you, venture capital is already quite heavily, you have to take a risk. You have to take a risk on a founder and on an idea that may become fruitful in the future. With private equity investment, you typically invest in a company that's already generating returns. It already has customers. So on a private equity, you already see these sustainability goals, these ESG requirements within businesses. But venture doesn't have that. Now, the big question around the world is, do we now implement a checklist into the venture? How do we invest in companies at an early stage? Do they have diversity across the investment, across the team? Do they have a certain offset that is satisfying the local regulator? Does their technology deploy into certain fundamentals within a city to help lower, I don't know, or increase jobs and lower CO2 emissions, lots of different things. So I think that's the real question, is where across the whole of the investment world and just growing as a business, is there going to be a checklist that we all have to satisfy, a global kind of regulation?
And thinking from the company perspective, let's not forget the sustainability. It has a lot of benefits as well. A corporate strategy focusing on sustainability can add brand value, can meet consumer demands, can increase efficiency. Also, it can attract valuable talent and create new opportunities. But you mentioned already the investors who are looking at the companies who have an ESG strategy. Why are investors putting sustainability at the top of the agenda nowadays?
Policies and regulation is one thing. Every year the world changes. Every year we destroy the planet more and more. I mean, again, it's data, facts and figures. We see now, we hear, when before you read in the newspaper, but now we see data. They scare us. So some of the large corporations and governments can make a difference, but it's also the belief in the people that need the support behind the governments and these policies to roll them out. So for us as human beings, every time we make an investment now, in the back of our minds, we are thinking about how this could make a difference, when before it hasn't really had that. Now, The US, again, now going to the financial world. So apologies if it's a little bit off scope, but it's relevant. The US market is struggling and it's been doing very well for the last few years. Now, this is good because it also now pushes eyeballs and attention onto emerging markets where we can actually make a difference. Everybody's not so brainwashed into Wall Street and New York. Money is now looking for different places, different pockets. As I said, it's some of the biggest corporations in Europe, like Volkswagen, are being heavily fined on emissions. Aviation industry, how we're traveling. I don't know if you Google now, I want to fly from France, Paris to Dubai. If you Google that, you'll have Emirates and Air France. Now, they are the same price. So it doesn't matter who you choose. But next to it, one airline will emit less emissions than the other. So we're now getting options where we're paying the same money, but we can consciously make a difference. Now, again, that hasn't happened before. So in the world we're living in now, we're having options. One is they're exactly the same, but one we can make a difference. And us as people, I think that's important for not only personal pride and satisfaction, but also it's good for business, it's good for image. And again, just that satisfaction, knowing when you've spent your dollars that you've been rewarded by helping the planet. And I think that's the mentality of the next gen, kind of the millennial generation onwards. And yes, before millennial, I'm not saying, but the millennial generation onwards is the ones that can really make a difference.
If we are going to look at the region, the UAE is taking steps to promote the green economy concept at the global level. Where is the region in terms of sustainable growth at this moment?
So everybody knows the Middle East is a certain fossil fuel. Everybody, you can joke around and call it dinosaur blood, you can call it whatever you would like, but the region has a history in a certain fossil fuel. Now, this year, the UAE announced a certain figure where they earned more returns from the non-oil economy, which just shows where their mindset is heading and where it's going to continue. Now, we're not a huge population here, but we have captured a global image. Most people know the Burj Khalifa Tower. Most people know where Dubai is. We're in somewhat the center of the world if you actually look on a map. Now, as a leader in image, we have a duty to roll out policies and set an example. Now, the only difference is we're not Europe. We're not so ahead of R&D. We don't have the European Investment Bank that pumps God knows how much money into R&D for the sustainability sector, the renewables, the clean technology. But it is coming here in the UAE, and it's progressing very, very fast because we're getting more and more population here, more and more businesses that we need to satisfy. And to join in with this world's movement, Dubai and the UAE and Abu Dhabi, we like to be, at the top. So what this country is doing well is it's adopting technologies to make people and companies make smarter decisions. So may that be using a certain chemical in the building materials to absorb CO2 emissions. May it be using electric vehicles. May it be a small little box you put into a boat that pulls in the emissions and pushes out cleaner air. Everybody's looking to make a change. And as I said, the government are opening up new authorities, new funds. We've actually got a Dubai Green Fund, which was set up by DIWA, which is what we all pay our power and electricity towards. So just knowing that we have now an investment fund that takes our dollars that we've spent on consuming power and reinvest it back into renewable power. So we're recycling. So the one good thing is, to finish, is the Arab region thinks about 30, 50 years, and they always have done, because they've grown so fast. I mean, the UAE is 50 years old. I mean, Europe is hundreds and thousands of years old. So we still see ourselves as new, and we need as much help from around the world as possible. And we have the infrastructure and the capacity and the capital to take in new businesses and help them grow from here. And the one thing the UAE would like to do is, we don't just want to send dollars to a different country and say, we'll see you in 10 years. And we want to be a part of that growth. We want to wave the UAE flag with you. So I think it's progressing heavily. And if you stick it in Google, the energy transition in the Middle East and the Arab region, you'll see hydrogen, you'll see EV, anything which isn't the normality that we once knew of in this part of the world.
Let's not forget about the knowledge that the region is adopting, as you say, like the technology. It's also important the people that are working at these companies, at these startups, and the value they bring in the region. But studies show that businesses and that business teams with an equal gender mix perform significantly better than a male-dominated team when it comes to both sales and profits. How does diversity help in making better decisions in business?
So, like this, I watch podcasts, I listen to certain things, and diversity is a big topic globally. Everyone always said the next best female entrepreneur is an African mother, because typically an African mother has to live in poverty and look after 10 children. Now, that is a tough thing, and people don't realize that. So if you look at another example, again, I watched a podcast, this gentleman say, men are typically obsessed with things. We like technologies, we like things. When women and females are more obsessed with people. And normally in the venture capital space, in the early stage space of believing in one of these new technologies that's going to change an industry, you have to believe in the people, not the things. So my point with diversity across the team and more female founders is, you get a completely different perspective on how businesses are run, decisions are made, and we haven't seen that at an equal level globally. We haven't seen it. So it's hard to say what it would look like, but we've all seen the certain female leaders. I think during the pandemic, we had I think it's the Prime Minister of New Zealand. She's created an incredible name for herself. There's other female figures around the world politically and also in business that are listing companies on New York NASDAQ. They've grown it from the bottom up. So there's more heroes. And I think that's another thing that females never had before. We were stuck in a way that was very traditional. Men went to work, women looked after the family. But again, in the Middle East, this is now changing. Laws are being rewritten. I think the UAE has led a few of them, and then other regions, surrounding regions, have followed. And that's quite peculiar. I mean, religion and law is being rewritten to satisfy a world need. And I think that's where this part of the world does incredible. I mean, they rewrite laws and religion. I don't see many other countries doing that to satisfy diversity and change. So that's my 2 cents. I mean, I'm currently looking to employ a female analyst for my venture capital fund. We've just brought on a female member of the investment committee, purely because of that factor. I think with again, we need to balance. We need to make a balance, and I think diversity is one step towards that.
We have reached the end of our meeting, but not before asking you one last question. How do you imagine the world you would like to live in?
It's a good question. I mean, I really want to my attitude is every move we take, every dollar we spend can always make a difference. I think it's going to be hard overnight to make imbalance balanced, but we can make a start. I think a lot of people get too obsessed with saving the world, saving poverty, when we need to start a lot of the time with the basics. So we need to get the fundamentals and the basics right. And I think we're seeing a lot of uncertainty globally at the moment. But again, we all have a common interest. And with the correct use of social power, certain figures doing the right things, certain people doing the right things, I see us living in a world where in the next 10 years, we're going to be doing more for the planet than we ever have done. We're going to see the biggest change in how our brains work, how we make decisions. We're going to see data allow us to cure certain diseases that we'd never done before. And who knows, we're going to see the first ever human being reach the 200 years old. And I think those babies are being born now. And again, this is all through enhancement of technology, but we all have to think as well, is technology is not always positive. It can be a negative effect. So we can sit here and talk about sunshine and rainbows, but we also have to protect ourselves in many different ways. So I see the world being a better place. We're on the right path, but we all have a common goal, which is looking after the planet, changing certain rules and regulations and laws to satisfy many, make things more equal. And we've done more of that over the last 2 years with the global pandemic than we ever have done. Countries came together. Countries are coming together now to sort out certain geopolitical issues. And that gives a lot of people hope that we can work together to do certain things. So that's probably the best way to kind of finish my end of the podcast. But I really appreciate your questions and thanks for having me. I hope to do more of these. I'm doing some, I've got a investor pitch day during April in Dubai. I'm part of another VCs for Good panel where we're talking about how we can, as VCs, can make better decisions, how we look at startups, you know, what is the checklist around the sustainability goals aligned to the United Nations. So lots of exciting things coming up in the coming months. So I really appreciate you for having me.
Yeah, so actually this is just the beginning, because I hope you become a constant presence of the ReThink podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicoletta.